is with the American Enterprise Institute, and he is the author of this article in Foreign Policy magazine, How to Save the Neocons. First of all, Mr. Muravchik, how do you define a neocon?
Well, that's a good question, Peter. The neocons were originally a group of mostly liberal intellectuals who broke with the bulk of the liberals during the Vietnam War era. Mostly we were hawks. Even some of us weren't necessarily hawks about the Vietnam War, but there came to be a prevailing attitude among liberals in the 70s that we had gotten into Vietnam because we were too anti-communist. Jimmy Carter, in his inauguration speech in '77, said we had an inordinate fear of communism. We were a group of liberals who really disagreed with that, who said, no, communism is a terrible evil, communism is a great danger. Set the argument about Vietnam aside for the moment. We still need to have a very tough anti-communist policy. And at that point, because we were such tough anti-communists, the other liberals put the label neoconservative on us. They kind of pushed us out of the liberal camp and said, no, you guys aren't liberals at all. You're some new kind of conservative. And they started calling us neoconservatives. And that label has been with us ever since. If you can project forward, because I'm sure you're more interested and your viewers are in what it stands for today, I think the essential element there of, on the one hand, a kind of idealism that you would associate perhaps with liberalism, a very strong belief in freedom and democracy and human rights, combined with a kind of militarism, that is a willingness to use force, or in general to see America play a very assertive role in the world. I think that combination is what defines neoconservatism. And
you write that the essential tenets of neoconservatism, belief that world peace is indivisible, that ideas are powerful, that freedom and democracy are universally valid, and that evil exists and must be confronted, are as valid today as when we first began.
Well, I think that's right. I think those are sort of basic points. The last one I would underline, that evil exists and must be confronted. We were militants against communism. Most of us were, or some of us, like myself, too young to have been around for the fight against Hitlerism, but we sort of identify with Winston Churchill and the people who were clamoring for confronting Hitler rather than appeasing him. And in today's circumstance, we're militants against jihadism, or whatever you want to call the ideology behind the terrorists.
You say in here that this is how to save the neocons. That's what this article is about, Operation Comeback. You say learn from our mistakes, but don't turn on President Bush.
Well, look, we're in trouble. The country may be in trouble, but I'm talking narrowly for the moment. Our political faction is in trouble. We're in trouble because our country is in a mess in Iraq. The war in Iraq has not gone as we had hoped. And neocons are very much identified with arguing for that war and supporting that war. And so we're taking a big hit, and I think that's only fair. I mean, something's gone wrong. What I don't want to do, and I've seen in the press some hints of my colleagues doing this, is to say, this is all Bush's fault. We're pure as the driven snow, but our pristine ideas were taken and screwed up by someone else. This is not convincing. I think it's not to say that Bush doesn't deserve some of the blame, but I think we've got to share in the blame.
And some of those colleagues, Elliot Cohen, Richard Pearl, correct? Ken Edelman?
Well, there were a bunch of quotes in an article that I think has not yet come out, but is hyped in advance in Vanity Fair. So I don't know whether the quotes were all accurate or whether they were all in context and so on. So I don't want to start going one-on-one with my colleagues about this, but it did, all told, create an impression that people in my comrades in the neocon camp were wanting to just point a finger at Bush, and if in fact that's what people are thinking, I think it's the wrong way to respond to this situation.
The second part of your solution is to deploy more than the military. We need to give more thought to how we aid Middle Eastern moderates. Who are those moderates?
Well, I think there are throughout the region. They're not only moderates, but even more to my liking, there are Democrats. There are people in that part of the world who are very much in sync with the essential policy that President Bush has articulated, and I think that very much comes from Neocons, which is to try to change the politics of the region by encouraging the growth of democracy. There are indigenous Democrats there in the Arab countries, in Iran, who want democracy in their own societies, and we have not been very effective in figuring out ways to help them. It's not necessarily easy. When the U.S. Embassy in Cairo announced publicly that it was giving 6 small grants to NGOs in Egypt to support human rights work or what have you, a huge government press campaign was ginned up to stain them, to blemish them as American puppets, American agents. So sometimes it's not easy to help them without it boomeranging, but we need to work hard on figuring out how we can give support to these indigenous Democrats.
So is President Mubarak an ally and is somebody that we should be supporting fully?
Well, that's the complexity of foreign policy, which is neither our nation nor any other ever has just one goal in mind. I suppose in the midst of a war you have one goal of defeating the enemy, but in normal times you have multiple goals. And what you see in Egypt is President Mubarak is not an ally in the question of trying to promote reform and democracy. He's a principal obstacle to that. On the other hand, on any number of other issues that we have concern about in the Middle East, he is an ally, sometimes a very pivotal ally in terms of trying to renew some kind of Israel-Arab peace process or other issues.
What about Muammar Gaddafi?
Well, that's a really good question. Gaddafi isn't an ally at all on any issue. Gaddafi is not good for his country and he's not good for us, but he did agree to forego his nuclear weapons. And we have a tremendous interest in trying to prevent nuclear proliferation, and suddenly he very cleverly made himself sort of the poster child for non-proliferation. So that's the kind of contradictory situations you often get into in diplomacy.
And before we go to calls, one of the other solutions that you have is prepare to bomb Iran. This has made a lot of news. You've got a lot of people on all sides talking about this. Why do you say that?
Well, this is obviously a controversial thing to say, and it's something that one has to say with a lot of sobriety, prepare to bomb someone. But I think, in fact, that the scariest thing that could happen in the world in the next couple of years is for this wild extremist, President Ahmadinejad, to get his finger on the nuclear trigger. And I think that's about to happen. I think that would make the world a much more dangerous place in many different ways. And I think that all the stuff we're doing right now with diplomacy, sanctions, UN Security Council is going absolutely nowhere. And even if it went somewhere, it wouldn't stop him. He is a man on a mission. And the only way we're going to keep his finger off the nuclear trigger is to carry out some airstrikes that destroy the Iranian nuclear weapons program.
What would that do to our relationship with the Middle Eastern moderates, as you call them?
There's already a lot of rage toward the United States in the region. There's already a very high level of anti-Americanism. And that would no doubt increase it. And when I suggest that we need to destroy militarily Iran's nuclear weapons program, I don't want to go into this with making light of the price we will pay for it. It will be a costly thing for us to do, costly politically. They will ratchet up the anti-Americanism in the region. No doubt the Iranian regime will try to do everything it can to retaliate against us in Iraq, step up its terrorist activities, what have you. But I think a sober assessment of those prices and dangers weighed against assessing what it would be like to have this terrorist state in possession of nuclear weapons leads me to conclude that paying the price is a lesser evil than letting them have the nukes.
Our guest is Josh Muravchik, resident scholar at the American Enterprise Institute, where he's been for nearly 20 years. First call for him, Little Falls, New York, Republican. Go ahead.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I've been conservative for over 50 years now, staunch conservative, and I've been against the war that President Bush has gotten the American people in, for the simple reason that that war was not in our interest. It was in the interest of the Neocons, who we don't hear about much anymore, Pearl and Wolfowitz. And aren't they both hold dual citizenship with Israel, number one. Number two, I have never seen a camel swim across the river with an atomic bomb tied on its back. I'm being sarcastic. But what I'm saying is this. If you don't have the capacity to deliver a bomb, an atomic bomb especially, what threat did Saddam Hussein have on America, and what threat would Iran have on America if it doesn't have the capacity to deliver these bombs to us?
Okay, 2 points. Number one, the first one about the ties to Israel. You addressed that in your article when it comes to neocons in Israel.
Well, but let me address this caller directly, because he's reflecting something that's very troubling, which is there has been neoconservatives have been very controversial, and that's as it should be, because we've recommended controversial policies. But there also has been a strain of the debate that has been, frankly, anti-Semitic, saying that a lot of neocons are Jewish, and this is true. But of course, you know, a lot of the political idea business is Jewish. Whether you talk liberals, conservatives, neocons, I don't know why it is, but it seems that Jews have some affinity for wrestling with political ideas. Maybe it comes from our Talmudic heritage. I don't know where it comes from. But this has been singled out that a lot of neocons are Jews, and therefore that the things that neocons are proposing really aren't honest ideas about what would be best for our country, but is a cover for some conspiracy to advance Israel's interests. And I think it's very prejudiced and very unfair and completely false. And this caller exemplified it when he said that he had heard that Richard Pearl and Paul Wolfowitz have dual citizenship, which is not true at all. Never have had any kind of Israeli citizenship. I suppose each of them has probably visited Israel at some point, as they have scores of other countries. So this is the kind of thing that really shouldn't be part of the debate. Now, secondly, the caller said, well, so what if Iraq and Iran have nuclear weapons because a camel can't swim across the ocean? First of all, Iran has missiles with which